Chapter 6. The man we had left in the village to observe Emil joined us here and reported that he had conversed with Emil until nearly 4 o'clock of the day he was to keep his appointment with us. Then Emil said he was about to keep his appointment. His body immediately became inactive and reposed upon the couch as though asleep. It was in this position until about 7 o'clock in the evening, when it gradually became more indistinct and disappeared. It was at this time in the evening that Emil came to us in the lodge at the little village. We had made a number of short trips from our headquarters with either Jast or Neprau accompanying us, and in every instance, they had shown their sterling qualities and worth. On one of these trips Emil, Jast, and Neprau accompanied us to a village where a temple called the Silence Temple, the temple not made by hands, is located. This village contains the temple and the houses of the attendants and is located on the former site of a village that had been nearly destroyed by the ravages of wild animals and pestilence. We were told that the masters visited this spot and found a few inhabitants left of about 3,000 population. They ministered to them and the ravages of the wild animals and pestilence ceased. The few villagers vowed that, if they were spared, they would, from that time on, devote their lives to God, serving Him in any way He chose. The masters left, and when they returned later they found the temple erected and attendants in charge. The temple is very beautiful, situated on an elevation overlooking the wide expanse of country. It is about 6,000 years old, is made of white marble, and has never needed repairs, as a piece chipped off replaces itself, as was proven by members of our party. Emil said, "This is called the Temple of Silence, the place of power. Silence is power, for when we reach the place of silence in mind, we have reached the place of power, the place where all is one, the one power, God. Be still and know that I am God." Diffused power is noise. Concentrated power is silence. When, through concentration, drawing to a center, we have brought all of our forces into one point of force, we have contacted God in silence, we are one with Him and hence one with all power. This is the heritage of man. I and the Father are one. There is but one way to be one with the power of God, and that is consciously to contact God. This cannot be done in the without, for God manifests from within. The Lord is in His holy temple, let all the earth keep silent before Him. Only as we turn from the without to the silence of the within can we hope to make conscious union with God. We will realize that His power is for us to use, and we will use it at all times. Then we will know that we are one with His power. Then will humanity be understood. Man will learn to let go of self-delusions and vanities. He will realize his ignorance and littleness. Then will he be prepared to learn. He will realize that the proud cannot be taught. He will know that only the humble can perceive the truth. His feet will feel the firm rock, he will no longer stumble, he will be poised in decision. To realize that God is the only power, substance, and intelligence may be confusing at first. But when man does realize the true nature of God and brings Him forth into active expression, he will use this power at all times. He will know that he consciously contacts His power at all times, when he eats, when he runs, when he breathes, or when he does the great work before him. Man has not learned to do the greater works of God because he has not realized the greatness of God's power and has not known that God's power is. For man's use, God does not hear us through our loud and vain repetitions nor our much speaking. We must seek God through the Christ within, the invisible connection which we have within ourselves. When the Father within is worshipped in spirit and truth, He hears the calls of that soul which sincerely opens to Him. The one who makes the connection with the Father in secret will feel the power flowing through him as the fulfillment of every desire. For he that sees the Father in the secret place of his own soul and there abides, him the Father will reward openly. How often Jesus disclosed His individual contact with the Father. See how He constantly held Himself in conscious communication with God within. See how He talked with Him as though He were personally present. See how powerful this secret inner relation made Him. He recognized that God does not speak in the fire, the earthquake, or the great wind, but in the still, small voice, the still, small voice deep in our own souls. When man learns this, he will become poised. He will learn to think things through. Old ideas will drop away, new ideas will be adjusted. He will soon find the ease and efficiency of system. He will learn at last to take all the questions that perplex him into this silent hour. There he may not solve them, but he will become familiar with them. Then he will not need to go hurrying and battling through the day and feel that his purpose has been defeated. If man would come to know the greater stranger, himself, let him enter his own closet and shut the door. There he will find his most dangerous enemy, and there will he learn to master him. He will find his true self. There will he find his truest friend, his wisest teacher, his safest advisor, himself. There will he find the altar upon which God is the undying fire, the source of all goodness, all strength, all power, himself. He will know that God is in the deepest part of the silence. He will find that within himself abides the Holy of Holies. He will feel and know that his every desire is in God's mind and is, therefore, God's desire. He will feel and know the closeness of the relationship of God and man, the Father and the Son. He will realize that only in consciousness has there been any separation of these which have seemed two, just as his spirit and his body have seemed to be two, but which in reality are one. God fills both heaven and earth. It was this great revelation that came to Jacob in the silence. He had slept on the stone of materiality. In a great burst of divine illumination he saw the outer as but the outpressing or expression of the image held within. So impressed was he by this that he called out, "Surely the Lord, or law, is in this place, the earth or body, and I knew it not? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate to heaven." Man will realize, as Jacob did, that the real gate to heaven is through his own consciousness. It is this ladder of consciousness, revealed in a vision to Jacob, which each of us must climb before we can enter that silent secret place of the Most High and find that we are in the very center of every created thing, one with all things visible and invisible. In and of the omnipresence. In Jacob's vision he was shown the ladder reaching from earth to heaven. He saw the angels of God descending and ascending upon it, God's ideas descending from spirit to form and ascending again. It was the same revelation that came to Jesus when the heavens were opened unto him and he saw the wonderful law of expression whereby ideas conceived in the divine mind come forth into expression and manifest as form. So perfectly was this law of expression revealed to the Master that at once he saw all form may be transformed, or changed in form, through a change of consciousness in regard to it. His first temptation was to change the form of stones to that of bread to satisfy personal hunger. But with the revelation of this law of expression came the true understanding that stones as well as all other visible forms have come forth from the universal mind substance, God, and are in themselves true expressions of divine mind. And all things desired, not formed, are still in this universal mind substance ready to be created or brought forth to fill every desire. Thus, the need for bread but showed that the substance with which to create bread or any other needed thing is at hand without limitation, and bread can be created from this substance just as well as stones can be created therefrom. Every good desire man has is God's desire, therefore, there is an unlimited supply in the universal God substance all about us to fill every desire. All we need do is to learn to use what God has already created for us, and this He wills to have us do that we may be free from every limitation and thus be abundantly free. When Jesus said, "I am the door," He meant that the I am in each soul is the door through which the life, power, and substance of the great I Am, which is God, comes forth into expression through the individual. This I Am has but one mode of expression, and that is through idea, thought, word, and act. This I Am God being, which is power, substance, intelligence, is given form by consciousness. And for this reason the Master said, "According to your faith be it unto you," and all things are possible to them that believe. Now we see that God is within the soul as power, substance, and intelligence, or in spiritual terms, wisdom, love and truth, and is brought out into form or expression through consciousness. The consciousness which is in the infinite mind of God and in man is determined by the concept or belief that is held in mind. It is the belief in separation from spirit that has caused our forms to age and die. When we see that spirit is all and that form is constantly being expressed from spirit, then shall we understand that that which is born of or brought out of spirit is spirit. The next great truth to be revealed through this consciousness is that each individual, being a concept of the divine mind, is held in that mind as a perfect idea. Not one of us has to conceive himself. We have been perfectly conceived and are always held in the perfect mind of God as perfect beings. By having this realization brought to our consciousness, we can contact the divine mind and so reconceive what God has already conceived for us. This is what Jesus called being born again. It is the great gift the silence has to offer us. For by contacting the God mind we can think with God mind and know ourselves as we are in reality rather than as we have thought ourselves to be. We contact God mind through true thought and so bring forth a true expression, whereas, in the past, perhaps through untrue thought, we have brought forth an untrue expression. But, whether the form be perfect or imperfect, the being of the form is perfect God power, substance, and intelligence. It is not the being of the form that we wish to change but the form that being has assumed. This is to be done through the renewing of the mind, or through the change from the imperfect to the perfect concept, from the thought of man to the thought of God. How important then to find God, to contact Him, to be one with Him and to bring Him forth into expression. How equally important is the silence or the stilling of the personal mind, that the God mind in all its splendor may illumine the consciousness. When it does, then we shall understand how the Son of Righteousness, righteousness, shall rise with healing in His wings. The mind of God floods consciousness as sunshine floods a darkened room. The infusion of the universal mind into the personal mind is like the entrance of the vastness of the outside air into the impurity of that which has long been held in some close compartment. It stands alone, supreme, and we realize that we are to build but one temple. The temple of the living God is the blending of the greater with the lesser through which the lesser becomes one with the greater. The impurity was caused by the separation of the lesser from the greater. The purity is caused by their union, so that no longer is there a greater and a lesser but just the one good, whole, pure air. Even so must we know that God is one and all things visible and invisible are one with Him. It is separation from Him that has caused sin, sickness, poverty, and death. It is union with Him that causes one to become a whole being or to become conscious of being whole. The separation from unity is the descent of the angels on the ladder of consciousness. The return to unity is the ascent of the angels upon the ladder. The descent is good, for unity then becomes expressed in diversity, but in diversity there need be no concept of separation. That which is diversity has been misconceived from the personal, or external viewpoint, to be separation. The great work for each soul is to lift the personal viewpoint to such heights in consciousness that it becomes one with the whole. When all can meet with one accord in one place, that place in consciousness where it is understood that all things visible and invisible have their origin in the one God. Then we stand upon the Mount of Transfiguration. At first we see Jesus and with him Moses and Elias, or law and prophecy, and the Christ, the power within man to know God, and we think to build 3 temples, but the deeper meaning comes. We are given to realize the immortality of man and to know that divinity is never lost, that divine man is deathless, eternal. Then Moses, the law, and Elias, the prophecy, disappear, and the Christ stands alone supreme and we realize that we have to build but one temple, the temple of the living God within our very selves. Then the Holy Spirit fills the consciousness and the sense delusions of sin, sickness, poverty, and death become no more. This is the great purpose of the silence. This temple from which you may chip a piece and the scar will be instantly healed that typifies the temple of our body, of which Jesus spoke, the temple not made by hands. Eternal in the heavens, which we are to bring forth here on earth. Chapter 7. Thursday morning the sun rose clear and beautiful but, instead of pushing on as we had expected, we were told that we would wait where we were until the trails had dried and the rivers had receded so we could proceed more comfortably. We were all fearful lest our provisions should be exhausted and one of our party voiced this fear. Emil, who had charge of the whole outfit, came to us and said, "You need not fear. Does not God take care of all His creatures, both great and small, and are we not His creatures? You will see that here I have a few kernels of corn or corn seed. I will plant them. By this act I have definitely said that I want corn. I have formed corn in my mind. I have fulfilled the law and in due season it will come forth. Is it necessary for us to await the long, arduous process that nature in her slow growth and unfoldment will take in order to grow corn? If so, we would be obliged to wait a long, hard time to obtain it. Why not use a higher or more perfect law, given us by the Father, to produce it? All that is required is to become quiet and visualize or idealize corn, and we have corn cured, ready for use. If you doubt it, you can gather it, grind it into meal, then make it into bread. There before us was corn, grown and cured so that we did gather it, and grind it, and afterwards made it into bread. Then Emil went on to say, this you have seen and believed, but why not use a more perfect law and bring forth a more perfect thing, or exactly what you want, bread? You will see by using this more perfect, or as you would say, more subtle law, I am able to bring forth exactly what I need, bread. And as we stood there spellbound, a large loaf of bread was in his hands. Nor did the supply stop until there were 40 loaves upon the table before us, placed there apparently by Emil himself. He remarked, you see, there is sufficient for all. If not sufficient, more can be supplied until there is enough and to spare. We all ate the bread and pronounced it good. Emil continued, when Jesus at Galilee asked Philip, when shall we buy bread? He did this to try him, for within himself he knew full well there was no necessity to buy the bread needed to feed the assembled multitude, nor to secure it through the material market then in existence. He saw the opportunity to prove to his disciples the power of bread leaven or increased by the Spirit. How often man in the mortal concept thinks as did Philip. He was calculating, as human consciousness is calculating today, from the visible supply on hand, thinking he had only so much bread or so much supply or so much money with which to buy. Jesus recognized that the one in Christ consciousness knows no limitation. He then, in Christ consciousness, looked to God as the source and creator of all and gave thanks for the power and substance right at hand to fill every want. He then broke and distributed, through his disciples, to those in outer need until the need was supplied and there remained 12 baskets over. Jesus never depended on the oversupply of another to fill his need nor the need of another. But he taught that our supply is right at hand in universal substance where all supply exists, and all we need do is to create it or bring it forth. Just so when Elisha multiplied the widow's oil, he did not apply to someone having an overabundance of oil, for had he done this the supply would have been limited. He contacted the universal, and the only limit to this supply was that all the vessels were filled. The supply could have flowed on until this day had there been vessels to receive it. This is not hypnotism. None of you feel that you are in any way under a hypnotic spell. Let me say that the only hypnotism is the self-hypnotism of believing that each and every one cannot do the perfect works of God, and create the desired condition or thing. For is not the need itself the desire to create? Instead of unfolding and creating as God wills us to create, you fold up in your little shells and say, I can't. And you hypnotize yourselves into actually believing that you are separate entities apart from God. You simply fall short of your perfect creation or expression. You do not let God express perfectly through you as it is His desire to do. Did not Jesus the great Master say, the works that I do, ye shall do also, and greater works than these shall ye do? Was it not Jesus' true mission here on earth to show that we, as sons of God, or man in his true estate, can create as perfectly and as harmoniously as God does? When Jesus commanded the blind man to bathe his eyes in the pool of Siloam, was not this intended to open the eyes of all? All were to see that Jesus was sent by the Father to show us that the Father intended us to create exactly as He creates. All are to do the perfect work as Jesus did by recognizing the Christ in Himself and in all. I can go one step further. This loaf I just received and held in my hand is consumed as though burned by fire. What happened? I misused the perfect law that brought forth my conception and consumed that which I brought forth, because of my misuse or not using rightly or righteously. The perfect law, which is as exact as music or mathematics or any other so-called natural law. If I persisted in the misuse of the perfect law, it would consume not only that which I create but would consume me, the Creator. Is the bread really destroyed? We will admit the form is changed, for, in place of the loaf, we have a small amount of dust or ashes. Has it not in reality been returned to the universal substance from which it sprang? Is it not now in unmanifest form, waiting to be brought again into manifestation? Is this not the way with all forms that go from our sight either by fire or decay or in any other way? Do they not return to the universal substance, God, from which they sprang? Is this not the meaning of what descends from heaven must descend into heaven? A short time ago you saw ice formed, without any apparent cause, as you perhaps think of it. Let me say that that is the same as creating the bread. I can use the law to obtain ice as well as bread, just as long as I use either as a benefit to mankind, or as long as I am working in living accord with the law, or expressing as God wishes all to express. It is good for all to make bread, or ice, or any and all things desired, and all must press on to the stage at which they can do these things. Can you not see that by using the highest law, the absolute law of God, you may bring forth that which you need or conceive in mind as your highest idea and thus please God more fully by manifesting more fully, knowing as Jesus did that we are perfect sons of God? Does not this suggest freedom from commercial bondage as well as all other bondage? As I see it, the commercial bondage will, in a few years, become the greatest bondage of all. If it goes on at the rate it is now progressing, it will dominate man, soul and body, and it cannot do otherwise than consume itself and those that are interested in it. There is no question but that the first inception of commercialism was on a high spiritual plane. But materialism was allowed to creep in until the very power used to create is the power that will consume, just as the very power used to create will always consume if not used rightly. Is not the pressing of commercialism and limitations upon us crowding us on to see that we must come up over, or overcome, these conditions? Is not this done by simply realizing that we are to do the perfect works of God, to raise our consciousness to the Christ consciousness? Is not this what Jesus taught us here on earth? Does not his whole life exemplify this? My dear brothers, do you not see that in the beginning there was the Word and the Word was with God? At this time, everything to be formed later was in unmanifest form in the universal mind substance, or as expressed by some, in chaos. This word in the original was actuality. This word, chaos, is misinterpreted to mean a turbulent or warring state, instead of the deep, spiritual state of actuality, always awaiting a definite, creative, spoken word through which it can spring forth into manifest form. When God principle desired to bring forth the world out of universal mind substance, God was quiet and contemplative. In other words, God saw an ideal world, he held in mind that substance of which the world was to be formed a sufficient time to lower its vibration. Then he spoke the word and the world was formed, or, as we might say, God visualized a mental pattern or mold into which could flow the substance needed to make the world and it came forth a perfect form, built upon the pattern which was held in consciousness. All these things might have been thought of by God, infinite power. He might have wished during an indefinite time that they were formed and made visible. Had not the definite spoken word been put forth into the formless ether, nothing would have been created or brought forth into visible form. In order to establish in visible results the thought and desires of even an infinite omnipotent creator and bring orderly forms out of actuality, it took the definite, positive let there be. So must we take the definite step. God is holding the ideal perfect world in mind in every detail and it is bound to come forth as a heaven or perfect home where all his children, all his creatures, and all his creations may dwell in peace and harmony. This is the perfect world that God saw in then beginning and the one he is thinking into existence right now, and the time of its manifestation lies in our acceptance of it. When we can come to the one place and know that we are all one man, and know that we are all members of God's body as much as one member of our body is a part of the whole body, then we are in and of God's kingdom, heaven here on earth, now. To make this manifest, realize that there is nothing material in heaven. All is spiritual. Realize that heaven is a perfect state of consciousness, a perfect world here on earth now, and all we need to do is to accept it. It is here all about us, waiting for us to open the inner eye. Through that eye our bodies shall be made light, the light which is neither of the sun nor moon but of the Father, and the Father is right here in the very innermost part of our being. We must sufficiently realize that there is nothing material, that all is spiritual. Then we must think of that wonderful God-given spiritual world which is right here now if we can realize it. Do you not see that God created all in this way? Did not God first become quiet and contemplative and see the light? Then he said, "Let there be light," and it was so. In the same way he said, "Let there be a firmament," and it was so. And likewise with other creations, he held each form or ideal steadfast in consciousness, then spoke the word, and the ideal was brought forth. Just so with man. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and give him dominion over all." God, all good, created all things good, man the greatest and last, with full dominion over all. Then man saw only good, and all was good until man separated himself from God and saw duality, or two. Then he, by his thought, created two, one good and the other the opposite, for if there were two, they would be opposite, good and evil. Thus evil came through man's perfect power to express or bring forth that which he gazed upon. If man had not seen evil, evil would have been given no power of expression. Only the good would have been expressed, and we would be as perfect as God sees us today. Would not heaven always have been on earth as God sees it and as we must all see it to make it manifest? Jesus had a perfect right to say that he came from heaven, for did not all come from heaven, the great universal mind substance? Since man was created in the image and likeness of God, did not God give man the power to create exactly as he creates? And does not God expect man to use that power as freely as he uses it, and in exactly the same way? By first perceiving the need, then conceiving the good, the ideal, with which to fill the mold that we hold in consciousness and which is to be filled from the universal mind substance. Then sending forth the word that it is filled, that it is so, and it is good. Jesus, when he was crucified, gave his flesh, the outer, what we see of the body, to prove that there is really a deeper or spiritual body. And it is this spiritual body that he manifested when he came forth from the tomb. This is the body of which he spoke when he said, "Destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up." He did this to show us we have the same spiritual body and that we can do all the works he did. There is no question that if Jesus had wished to do so, he could have saved himself. There is no doubt but that he saw there was a great change taking place in his body. He also saw that those about him were not able to see that they also could bring forth the spiritual body, as he was attempting to have them see. They still looked to the personal, and he saw that if he brought forth a spiritual body without some decided change, the people would not be able to discern between the material and the spiritual. So he adopted the way of the crucifixion to bring about the change. Truly is not this the Christ in man, which the great Master, Jesus, whom we all love and reverence, came to show? Did he not unfold his life here on earth to show us the perfect way to God? Can we do other than love this perfect ideal way when we once see it, whether it be planting seed, making bread, or doing the 1,000,001 things necessary to human existence? Are not these acts mere lessons carrying us on to our unfoldment? Some day we are to realize that we are truly sons of God, not servants, that as sons we can and do have all that the Father has, and that we can use it just as freely as our Father does. I admit this takes a mighty faith at first, one that usually must be taken step by step and must be practiced faithfully like music or mathematics, until we come to the place of knowing. Then we are grandly, beautifully free. Could there be a better, truer example of this life than that of Jesus? Can you not recognize the power that is in his name, Jesus, the Christ made manifest, or God manifesting through the flesh man? Jesus came to the place where he relied wholly upon his deep knowledge or understanding of God, and this is how he did his mighty works. He did not rely upon his own willpower or upon strong, concentrated thoughts. Neither must we rely upon our own willpower nor strong, concentrated thoughts, but upon the will of God. "'Tis not my will, but thine, O God, be done." Will to do the will of God. Do you not think that Jesus willed in all things to do the will of God, or to do what God willed him to do? You will note that very often Jesus is referred to as going into a high mountain. Whether he physically ascended a high mountain or not, I do not know. This I do know, that we must all ascend to the heights, the very highest in consciousness, to receive our illumination. This height means the very top of the head, and there, if the faculty is not developed, we must develop it by spiritual thoughts. Then from the heart, the love center, we must let love flow forth to balance all, and when this is done the Christ is revealed. The Son of Man perceives that he is the Son of God, the only begotten Son, in whom the Father is well pleased. Then with constant love, we must realize this for all. Just stop and think deeply for a moment and realize the countless number of the grains of sand of the seashore, the countless number of drops of water that go to make up the waters of the earth, the countless number of life forms in the waters of the earth. Then realize the countless number of rock particles that are contained in the whole earth, the countless number of trees, plants, flowers, and shrubs upon the earth, the countless number of forms of animal life upon the earth. Realize that all are the outpicturing of the ideal held in the great universal mind of God, that they all contain the one life, the life of God. Then think of the countless number of souls born upon this earth. Then realize that each soul is a perfect outpictured ideal image of God as God sees himself, that each soul is given the same power, expression, and dominion over all that God himself has. Do you not think that God wills or wishes man to unfold these godlike or God-given qualities and to do the works that God does through the inheritance given man by the Father, the one great, universal mind in all, through all, and above all? Then realize that each person is an expression or pressing out, from the unseen, the Spirit, into visible form, a form through which God loves to express. When we can realize and accept this, we can truly say as Jesus did, "Behold, the Christ is here." It is in this way that he attained his mastery over the worldly or flesh self. He recognized, claimed, and accepted his divinity, then lived the life just as we must do. Chapter 8. After a delay of 8 days, we broke camp on Monday morning and proceeded on our way. The afternoon of the third day out, we came to the bank of a large river. The stream was about 2,000 feet wide, running bank full, and the current was at least 10 miles per hour. We were told that this stream, in ordinary times, could be crossed at this place without any inconvenience. We decided to camp until morning and observe the rise and fall of the water. We were informed that we would be able to cross by bridge farther upstream, but to reach this bridge would necessitate a detour of at least 4 days' hard travel. We felt that if the water was receding, it would be better to wait a few days rather than undertake the long detour. It had been demonstrated to us that we need not take any thought as to our provisions for, from the day already referred to, when our provisions were exhausted, the whole company, consisting of over 300 persons, had been supplied with an abundance of provisions from the invisible, as we called it. This supply was maintained for 64 days, until we returned to the village from which we started. Thus far, none of us had any idea of the true significance or meaning of the things we were experiencing. Neither were we able to see that these things were performed by definite law, a law that all can use. When we were assembled for breakfast next morning, we found 5 strangers in camp. They were introduced and it was mentioned that they were from a party that was camped on the other side of the stream and were returning from the village of our destination. We thought very little of this at the time, as we naturally supposed they had found a boat and had crossed in it. One of our party said, "If these people have a boat, why can we not use it to cross the stream?" I think all of us saw this as a way out of our difficulty. But we were told that there was no boat as the crossing was not thought to be of sufficient importance to maintain one. After finishing breakfast that morning, we were all assembled on the banks of the stream. We noticed that Emil, Jast, and Neprau with 4 others of our party were talking with the 5 strangers. Jast came to us and said they would like to cross with the others to the camp on the other side of the stream, as they had decided to wait until the next morning to see if the water showed signs of receding. Of course, our curiosity was aroused and we thought it rather foolhardy to attempt to swim a stream as swift as the one before us just to make a friendly call upon a neighbor. We felt that swimming was the only way the crossing could be accomplished. When Jast rejoined the group, the 12, fully dressed, walked to the bank of the stream, and with the utmost composure stepped on the water, not into it. I never shall forget my feelings as I saw each of those 12 men step from solid ground upon the running water. I held my breath, expecting, of course, to see them plunge beneath and disappear. I found afterwards that that was the thought of all our party. At the time, I think each of us held his breath until they were all past midstream. So astonished were we to see those 12 men walking calmly across the surface of the stream without the least inconvenience and not sinking below the soles of their sandals. When they stepped from the water to the farther bank, I felt that tons of weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I believe this was the feeling of every one of our party. Judging from the sighs of relief as the last man stepped ashore, it certainly was an experience that words fail to describe. The 7 belonging to our party returned for lunch. While the excitement was not so intense at the second crossing, every one of us breathed more freely when the 7 were safe ashore again. Not one of our party had left the bank of the stream that forenoon. There was very little discussion regarding what we had witnessed, so engrossed were we with our own thoughts. The second day the company was toiling up the steep side of a mountain with the hot sun pouring down upon us when our chief, who had said but little during the last 2 days, suddenly remarked, "Boys, why is it that man is obliged to crawl and gravel over this earth?" We answered in chorus that he had voiced our thoughts exactly. He went on to say, "How is it, if a few are able to do the things we have seen accomplished, that all men cannot accomplish the same things? How is it that man is content to crawl, and not only content to crawl but is obliged to do so? If man was given dominion over all things, he was certainly given power to fly above the birds. If this is his dominion, why has he not asserted this dominion long ago? The fault must certainly be in man's own mind. This must all have come about by man's own mortal concept of himself. He has only been able, in his own mind, to see himself crawling, thus he has only been able to crawl." Then Jas took up the thought and said, "You are perfectly right, it is all in man's consciousness. He is limited or unlimited, bound or free, just as he thinks. Do you think that the men you saw walk across the stream yesterday to save themselves the inconvenience of this trip are in any way special creations any more than you are? No, they are not created in any way different from you. They do not have one atom more power than you were created with. They have, by the right use of their thought forces, developed their God-given power. The things you have seen are accomplished in accord with definite law, and every human being can use the law if he will." Chapter 9. Located in this village was the Healing Temple. It is claimed that only words of life, love, and peace have been given expression in this temple since its erection, and the vibrations are so potent that nearly all who pass through the temple are instantly healed. It is also claimed the words of life, love, and peace have been used and sent out so long from this temple, and the vibrations emanating from them are so strong that, should words of inharmony and imperfection be used at any time, they would have no power. We were told that this is an illustration of what takes place in man. If he would practice sending forth words of life, love, harmony, peace, and perfection, he would in a short time not be able to utter an inharmonious word. We attempted to use inharmonious words and found in each instance that we could not even utter them. This temple was the destination of those of the company who were seeking healing. It is the custom for the masters who are in the vicinity to congregate at this village at certain intervals for a season of devotion and instruction to those who wish to avail themselves of the opportunity. The temple is dedicated entirely to healing and is open to the people at all times. As it is not always possible for the people to reach the masters encourage the people to go to the temple for healing. This is the reason they do not heal those that congregate for the pilgrimages. They accompany the pilgrims to show the people that they are no different than themselves, that all have the same God-given power within. I suspect that when they crossed the river that morning they did it to show that they could rise above any emergency and that we should also rise above any emergency. In places not accessible to this temple, all who come to the masters for help are greatly benefited. Of course, there are the curious and those who do not believe that do not seem to receive any help. We witnessed a number of assemblages of from 200 to 2,000 people, and all those desiring healing were healed. A great many told us they were healed by declaring silently that they desired to be made whole. We had the opportunity to observe a large number of those healed at different times, and we found that about 90% of these healings were permanent, while all the healings in the temple seemed to be permanent. It was explained that the temple is a concrete thing located in one place, representing the God Center, the Christ in the individual, just as all churches should typify this God, or Christ Center, in the individual, and that it is always accessible to those desiring to go there. They could go to the temple as often as they chose and stay as long as they wished. The ideal is thus formed in the minds of those who come to it, and the ideal becomes fixed in mind. Emil said, "Right here comes the suggestion that has led to the idolatry of the past. Men sought to grave in wood or stone, gold, silver or brass the image of that which they idealized, but any idol can only imperfectly picture the ideal. The image, the idol, is no sooner formed than men become conscious that the ideal surpasses the idol, and they are shown that they must gaze upon, love and idealize for themselves that which they wish to bring forth from the within, instead of graving any idol in outer form of the ideal they would express. A later form of idolatry is to idealize the personality of the one who expresses our ideal. We should idealize the ideal which he expresses and not the personality which expresses it. This is true even of so great a person as Jesus. Thus, Jesus chose to go away when he saw the people were idealizing his personality instead of the ideal which he represented. They sought to make him their king, only realizing that he could supply them with every outer need. Not recognizing that they within themselves had the power to supply their every need, and that this they must do, as he, himself, had done. He said, "It is expedient that I go away, for if I do not go, the Comforter will not come," meaning that as long as they looked to his personality they would not recognize their own powers. For they must look within their very selves. Another may teach or tell you, but you of yourselves must do the work, for if you look to another, you build the idol instead of bringing forth the ideal. Chapter 10. Emil talked to us on the realization of the Christ consciousness. He said, "It is through the power of our own mind or thought action that we are able to bring forth or realize the Christ consciousness. Through the power or process of thought we can transmute and evolve our bodies, or our outer conditions and surroundings, through recognition of this Christ consciousness within ourselves, so that we will never experience death nor any change called death. This is done wholly through man's power to visualize, idealize, conceive, and bring forth that which he gazes upon. This is done by first knowing or perceiving or having faith that the Christ is within ourselves, seeing the true meaning of Jesus' teaching. Holding our body one with God, made in the image and likeness of God. And merging that body into the perfect God body just as God sees us. We have idealized, conceived, and brought forth into manifestation the perfect God body. We are born again truly of and in the spirit kingdom of God. It is in this way that we can return all things to the universal mind substance, from which they sprang, and bring them back or return them perfect into outer form or manifestation. Then, by holding them in their pure, spiritual, perfect state, the vibrations are lowered and the things we wish to create come forth in perfect form. In this way we can take every false belief, every old condition, every sin, all of our past life, it does not matter what it has been, how good or seeming bad. It does not matter what mountain of false belief or doubt and unbelief or fear we or anyone else have erected about us or in our paths, and we can say to them all, "I now return you to the great ocean of universal mind substance, from which all things come forth and where all is perfection, and from which you sprang, there to be again resolved into the elements from which you were created. I now return you or bring you back from that pure substance as perfect and pure as God sees you and hold you always in that absolute perfection." We can say to ourselves, "I now realize, in the old order of things, that I brought you forth imperfectly and you manifest imperfectly. Realizing the truth, I now bring you forth perfect as God sees you. You are reborn perfect and it is so." We must realize that the inner alchemist, God within, has taken hold of this and has transmuted, refined, and perfected that which seemed imperfect. That which we brought forth and are now returning. We should realize that it is refined, perfected, and transmuted just as our own bodies are refined, perfected, and returned to us as God's body, joyously perfect, beautifully free. Finally, we should realize that this is the perfect Christ consciousness in all and for all. This is hid with Christ in God. The morning of July 4th found us at the summit of the pass. Emil had told us the evening before that he felt we had earned a holiday and that he saw no more fitting time than the 4th to celebrate. At breakfast Emil began by saying, "This is the 4th of July, the day you celebrate the birth of your independence. How fittingly expressive is this day. I feel that all of you must have more or less confidence in us, therefore, I am going to speak freely. In a few days we shall be able to prove to you conclusively that the statements I am making are true. We love to call your country America, and all of its inhabitants, Americans. You will never know the joy these few moments bring to me, on this day of such import. To be able to talk with you and see eye to eye with a small group of Americans who were, with one exception, born in that great land. Let me say that it has been the privilege of some of us to have beheld your country long before Columbus started on the memorable expedition. There had been other attempts at discovery, but they had come to naught. Why? Simply because of the absence of that one God-given quality, faith. The one who had the courage and faith to see and carry out the vision had not yet awakened. The moment that soul awoke to the realization that the earth was round and there must be land on the other side equal to that already known, we could see that another great historical epoch had begun to unfold. Who but the great omnipotent one, who sees all things, could have awakened that little grain of faith in the soul of Columbus? What were his first words as he stood before the Queen that day, not recognizing the higher power? Dear Queen, I am firmly convinced that the earth is round and I wish to sail forth and prove it. I do not know whether you recognize it, but those words were God-inspired, and Columbus was recognized as one who had the determination to carry out what he undertook. Then the long sequence of events started to unfold which was shown us years before. Not in its entirety, but enough so that we have been able to follow. Of course we dreamed of the almost unbelievable wonders to be accomplished and recorded in the seemingly short span of years has passed. But those of us that have been privileged to live through it now fully realize that far greater wonders are in store for your great nation. We feel that the time has come for your nation to awaken to its true spiritual import, and we wish to do all we can to help you to this realization. It appears that their interest in us was prompted by their great desire to have America accept the Christ consciousness and realize her possibilities. They know that her inception was truly spiritual, and through that fact she is destined to be a leader in the spiritual development of the world.